Hey guys, Omni here. Welcome back for another breakdown from New Rockstars for The Mandalorian Season 3. This time we're going to be checking out the breakdown for Episode 3, which I'm sure has a lot of little juicy nuggets hidden throughout it that even I did not catch. With that said, I really enjoyed this week's episode. If you haven't seen my reaction to it, go check it out. It really kind of expands on this plot line that we've been following all the way back to Season 1, Episode 1, man. Catching up with Pershing, with Elia, and kind of seeing how Moff Gideon, even while being taken down, still kind of has his clutches at every nook and cranny and every turn, and somewhere, somehow, he's striking out. You know, simultaneously working within the New Republic and without in the Outer Rims. I assume it's Gideon because of Elia and her ties. Obviously, she was like right hand for him on his bridge and all of that, and whatever further connections that Gideon has to himself to what other larger entity, if there is one. It all seems just too coordinated that all of this happens simultaneously. Pershing is executed, and this precision strike by this force that goes a little bit beyond what a typical just Imperial warlord might have as Bo-Katan's castle is taken out. And we've seen that the Mandos end up at some kind of battle in Navarro, and it makes me think that it might be the next target or something else might be going on there. Somebody has got a bit of a personal stake in everything that's happening, and we're seeing these things start to happen in multiple places, this orchestration in a larger web. And I can't wait to see how it unfolds, man. So let's go ahead and check out this breakdown. If you're not subscribed to New Rockstars, go give them a like, a subscribe, and all that jazz. And I'll have a link to their video in the description of this one, and let's check it out.
Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Eric Boston. This is a breakdown of The Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 3, Chapter 19, The Convert. But who is the convert of this episode? Is it Bo-Katan to the Children of the Watch? Or the failed conversion of Dr. Pershing, aka the somehow
Palpatine returned?
I'm gonna break down all the Star Wars Easter eggs and the interesting details in this episode that you missed, because there were a whole bunch of them. And please subscribe to my new channel, The Deep Dive, for even fuller analyses in the titles you love, like my John Wick Deep Dive coming this weekend. Also, if you're going to WonderCon, I'm gonna be doing a panel with other New Rockstars hosts on Friday, March 24th at 2:30, room 213 AB. Come hang out with us. We open back in the living waters of the mines of Mandalore as Bo-Katan catches her breath upon seeing the Mythosaur last episode, but now only sees eerie stillness. Din Djarin wakes up and notices Grogu pats him with his hand. He might have been using a bit of forced healing to resuscitate him. As Mando sits up, Bo-Katan's helmet light scans from side to side, searching that water surface for any ripple or any air
Well, this will be real. He was probably like, wake up.
bubble. Bo-Katan says the water wasn't always so deep, but the bombings of the Purge must have triggered seismic activities. So the Mythosaur wasn't always down here.
Which, like Godzilla himself, awoken by the atomic bombs, this creature was let loose and maybe even freed and uncovered from being long since buried or in hiding.
But the thought-to-be-extinct creatures were merely dormant, and the Night of a Thousand Tears cracked the caves enough to clear a path for the Mythosaur to swim up. But Bo-Katan does not tell Din about that Mythosaur, either out of disbelief or out of distrust of Din, as she wants to keep this secret to herself. Perhaps one day prove herself by riding this Mythosaur.
I read it as, and there's a lot of ways you could read it, because that's very much a possibility, but the way I read it was like she's still like wrestling with her own spirituality and what does it mean? Like, because the whole episode seemed to be really just as much as it was about Mando's, you know, redemption, it seemed about being a way to pull her back as well. Right her wrongs in the eyes of the Mandalorians and all that. I don't know, and like cure her wounds. So her not saying anything, I feel like, because I think she's still on the fence. She says she's not really given in one way or the other, and even by the end of the episode, when she's like, I don't follow the creed. And I was like, well, have you removed your helmet? And she's like, well, no. Well, then, until you do, you're one of us. So, like, I think it's her still keeping at arm's length while she's still having those barriers she's put up her whole life kind of slowly etched away. That's how I read it. And I think that's just the way the episode tonally was taking us, but hell, I could be wrong. I don't know.
As pointed out at the end of this episode, Bo-Katan leaves her helmet on while piloting back to Kalevala, as if the old ways of Mandalore have been spooked back into her at the site of the Mythosaur. Din says this is the way, Bo-Katan says this is the way, and Grogu says, yeah, this is definitely him trying to vocalize this is the way. But it sounds like his first steps into babbling might have been inspired by the Enzellans, whom he hugged back on Navarro. When the trouble starts, he too helmets up with the lid, but he only does so when Din leaves, because if Din had stayed, he would have felt protected by Papa. They're attacked by Tie Interceptors, and Bo-Katan says, I've scugged off a lot of Imperial warlords. Scug is a Zygerian insult in Star Wars, and I think one of those warlords, one of the few who could still even be out there, the one who sent this fleet is Grand Admiral Thrawn, because even Bo seems surprised later, saying that's a lot of ships for an Imperial warlord. We get a burst of Ludwig Göransson's flute.
It very much could be. I've always kind of thought that Gideon himself would, in large in part, probably be under Thrawn in whatever this ongoing project is. That Gideon was like the assistant manager that we've only been kind of touching base with right now as the further shadowy machinations are revealed the farther we get into this. Obviously, Thrawn was name dropped last season. It's probably going to be a large part of the Ahsoka show. I feel like this will be part of whatever that event is they'll be culminating to or building to with all these shows. But I don't know, man. I think Gideon and Thrawn are connected. So I think by building up to Gideon, I think we are, by extension, building up to Thrawn. I mean, they could be two different factions easily, but I don't know. I'm very excited, though. I cannot wait until we get to Thrawn, man.
As Favreau works in an Iron Man 2 skydive of Mando from the gauntlet, and I love how Mando waits to ignite his jetpack until after the interceptors have cleared, because if he had hovered too slowly, they would be able to pick him off. Din takes off fast in a Naboo starfighter. As he ascends beneath him on that landing pad, a second later, an explosion tears through where the N1 just was. He climbs and then tips over, hammerheads to get a clean shot on the interceptor, and then tilts a nose to clear the explosion. And I love that they show the wreckage of the interceptor crashing in the water behind him. It's just such a well-directed dogfight. Bo-Katan tells R5 that she grew up flying these cliffs and immediately scrapes the gauntlet on the cliff wall. 3 TIE bombers bomb the shit out of Bo-Katan's castle. She calls them mud scuffers. Son of a mud scuffer was used by Cara Dune in the season 2 finale. Bo chases them down, and behind her you can see R5 twisting its dome as if to say, no, don't do it. They zip off in hyperspace, and then we move on to Coruscant. This is the latest in history we've seen it in live action since George Lucas first showed Coruscant in the Return of the Jedi special edition during that celebration montage. Now this new Republic era of Coruscant is colorful and lively compared to the brutalist authoritarian monotones it was in Andor during the Imperial era. A New Republic amnesty officer walks in late, adjusting her uniform and her badge. This is G68, aka Elia Kane, Katie O'Brien, who played Jentora in Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania and was last seen as Moff Gideon's communication officer in season 2. Her hasty arrival is a clue that she's not a real fan. She's on a job to scope out Pershing. And her name, Elia Kane, as in a liar, and Kane, or alternate spelling Kane, the brother in Genesis.
Oh wow,
who
that's a good point.
Now this is the same exact opera house from Revenge of the Sith, where Palpatine told Anakin the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, which is ironic because Elia Kane, I believe, is an agent for Palpatine's immortal legacy. Pershing is the beneficiary of the New Republic amnesty program, in which ex-Imperials are given second chances based on the post-World War II Operation Paperclip, in which Nazi scientists like Werner von Braun were welcomed into the U.S. military establishment to help us during the Cold War and win the moon race. Pershing says his research was twisted into something cruel and inhumane at the behest of an individual intent on using cloning technology to secure more power for himself, referring to the genetics research he had been doing in the past 2 seasons on behalf of Moff Gideon on the child Grogu we first saw in chapter 3 from season 1. Now we are now a decade after the Battle of Endor, so it's just interesting that the New Republic would still extend amnesty to imps who served war criminals this late after the war, or fawn over them in their now illegal cloning research at public TED Talks. This just shows how flawed the New Republic is currently and how vulnerable it is to the rise of the First Order. Like historically, the United States recruited Werner von Braun, but von Braun didn't keep building rockets for like rogue Nazi SS officers 10 years after World War II. As Pershing says he now wants to help the New Republic, his hands in the holodisplay behind him nervously fidget. And he says that his original intentions were good, and he tugs his ear. And we cut back to Elia reading it as his poker tell. Him touching his ear is actually a callback from when Cara Dune and Din Djarin took him in the season 2 finale. Cara shot that Imperial pilot, injuring Pershing's ear. That pilot was bragging about the Empire destroying Alderaan. And so Pershing Pershing really is flashing back to the whole idea of Imperial cruelty. He tells the story of his mother's heart getting out and wishing he had simple organ cloning. He says he just wanted it for organ transplants, and he credits the Kaminoans for their work. These were the ones who created the army of clones from Jango Fett.
Yep.
In Bad Batch, one of those Kaminoans is currently in Imperial holding for some secret project that's probably connected to this. But Pershing says rather than one strand, he could combine the best genetic attributes from both donors, which kind of feels like a dig at the Bad Batch because they were the opposite of this, the worst strands, but also sets up the research that will be used by Palpatine.
And synthesis and like splicing, like combining genes, like all of this, and specifically the need for Grogu as a part of this experiment seems like, I mean, stuff we've seen a lot in the expanded universe and how Force Unleashed is cloning Force users is extremely difficult, if not next to impossible. So what markers would you want to carry over? Like the replication of the midichlorians or the connection to the Force is not something that's been successfully cloned in most iterations, and it's a very difficult process even for the ones in which it has been successful. So why Grogu specifically, other than to like farm Jedi in the hopes of being able to instill the Force into other users, or maybe even what somehow Palpatine's back or whatever, you know? I mean, it's kind of always what I feel like it's been building up to, but I don't know. It seems like that's what they're trying to get. You know, that's why specifically he talks about that, those pulling these elements from different genes, just different strands, and combining them is an important factor. You know, because there are certain species that are inclined naturally to lean more towards the Force. So, and other aspects, you know, just being able to create like the superhuman, take all the best attributes of any particular race, species, or whatever, and then put it into a singular entity. You know, Bad Batch is definitely touching on some type of experiments with this hemlock and why they want LSA's expertise into this, why they've gathered the Zillo Beast, why they've been harvesting all these very, differently equipped creatures in a way that it seems like they're trying to create some kind of super soldier of sorts or something altogether different. Like if they could get, because they talked about how it's got natural, its skin is like basically armor plating, it's impenetrable. It can harness and exude electricity or energy. How can we weaponize that and applicate it or continue that and bring that trait into something? Has anybody seen, what was it, Man's Best Friend? That horror movie about the dog that had the DNA of a jaguar, of like a viper, and like all this other stuff. And it was just like it could camouflage itself. It was poisonous. It had the strength of a leopard or whatever. It had all this shit, and that's like what it makes it seem like that's eventually what some sort of their goal was going to be building towards.
Cloners. The whole idea here is probably to use a mix of genetic material with high M count from Grogu and existing samples that Palpatine provided before he died. After this, Pershing tells the fan the first casts rejected the formula almost immediately, perhaps referring to that gooey pre-Snoke strand cast that we saw in the tank in the Navarro base in season 2. Pershing is mobbed by Coruscant aristocrats, one of whom brags about being a draft dodger and not knowing the difference between the Empire, the Rebels, and the New Republic. This crowd just sounds like eugenics fetishists who now get away with their devil's advocacy because they're now fortunate to live in an open society. The taxi droid is actually the same model as Ralph McQuarrie's original concept art for C-3PO. He's voiced by Dylan Fersheen, an assistant editor on the show, and he recommends the Sky Dome Botanical Gardens, which was mentioned in a number of Legends novels, and the Myceth blossoms that he mentions come from the Wookiee planet Kashyyyk that are found in the game Star Wars Galaxies. He mentions an exhibit on hyperdrive technology, which could connect to the ROCKSTARS invaders that Luth and Rael brought up in Andor Episode 4. The ROCKSTARS were also from Legends. They were the ancient inventors of hyperspace technology, but currently canonically, hyperspace technology was derived from the Purrgil, the hyperspace whales that Grogu just saw 2 episodes ago. The taxi droid also mentions extinct animals like the Mantabog of Malastar. The Mantabog were airborne blanket-shaped animals that smothered their prey. They're actually mentioned in RPG sourcebook, Coruscant, and the Core Worlds. One of the amnesty officers as he walks up says, "Poodoo, we don't get promoted." Poodoo, again, meaning Bantha fodder. And I just love that we overhear a couple of these ex-Nazis who were given second chances complaining about not getting promoted. When Pershing walks up, M34, G27, and M40 all turn to look at him, but G68 keeps her head down down initially because she is expecting him. We see how Pershing has a new amnesty program badge, which looks like an elongated version of the Orbesh A for amnesty and for asshole. They speculate on Moff Gideon.
It's almost their own kind of scarlet letter in a way, you know? An A.
And one saying he heard he escaped en route to the War Tribunal, the other saying that was just a cover story. I heard they hooked him up to the Mind Flayer. Now, a Mind Flayer was first mentioned by Cara Dune in Season 1, Chapter 8.
I'm a rebel shock trooper. They'll upload me to a Mind Flayer.
Those aren't real. That was just wartime propaganda.
And this episode shows it was real tech used by the Empire, but now in a lesser form used by the New Republic to lobotomize or Eternal Sunshine or Clockwork Orange someone's dark memories and thoughts out of their minds. But Gideon escaping is the cover story? Why would that be the preferable propaganda, that a war criminal escaped?
That doesn't make any sense to me.
The Republic, right? You'd think it would be the opposite, that they would say they lobotomized someone who in actuality escaped. So if they did Mind Flayer him, I wonder if Elia Kane was behind that plan, and that the New Republic is actually more concerned with being accused of torture than they are worried about being seen as having lax security. Clearly, they just have messed up priorities, and that's why the First Order is going to get them. These guys reminisce on the little things.
And that's also a possibility.
You know, the uniforms fit better, the trains ran on time, those yummy yellow travel biscuits, also planetary genocide. G68 says she preferred the red ones. She also eats a red popsicle because she's a psychopath. Pershing reads up on Coruscant, which a voice Wikipedia calls an ecumenopolis, referring to a planet-wide city, saying it's one of many, also referring to Hosnian Prime. It goes on to say, though Coruscant is referred to as the center of our galaxy, it's precisely located at our... and then she gets cut off. But according to the Star Wars galaxy map, while Coruscant is a core world, there's actually a more inner tier called the Deep Core, with planets like Tython, which we also saw in Mando Season 2, and closest to the core, Biss, which is Palpatine's secret throne world. The fact that this recording cuts off here might be a clue that before Exegol and Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine's cloning refuge was actually Biss, and that is where his essence is currently hiding, using Snoke to build up the First Order. Elia leaves a whole crate of yellow Nazi cookies, still wrapped with that Imperial crest and Orbesh EB, maybe for Empire biscuits? The evilest of the Girl Scout cookies, which is also just a short bite. Pershing's supervisor wishes him a happy Bendu day, which is the Bendu day of the week. So it's kind of like saying happy Friday if Friday was followed by another Monday, because there's only like 5 days of their week. Later they actually say Tongs days, am I right? So the order of the days of the week go Prima Day, Syntax Day, Tongs Day, Zell Day, and Bendu Day. Tongs were actually the race that once lived on Coruscant, some of whom fled in Legends continuity to found Mandalore. Meanwhile, Bendu is that large force-sensitive creature from Atollon and Rebels who helped Kanan and Ezra repair their friendship. I love how these archive discs look like the disc that was handed to Leia at the end of Rogue One, so this just would be the hardware that they used to store digital records. The plaza that Pershing and Kane visit is the same part of Coruscant that we saw in Season 2, Episode 14 of Clone Wars, Duchess of Mandalore, where Obi-Wan met up with Satine. The music we hear is actually a carnival version of the March of the Resistance theme. The Magician is a cameo by Dean Cundey, one of the all-time best cinematographers who worked on the Back to the Future trilogy.
I thought he looked familiar. I was like, why does this guy look so familiar?
His Flash cameo here is kind of like his cameo as the 1885 photographer in Back to the Future 3 who snaps Marty and Doc's photo. Be sure to check out my Back to the Future deep dive because that guy
God, I love those movies.
Work. Now, it's interesting to watch Kane work Pershing, as Pershing is ready to move on from his cloning research, but it's Kane who waits for him to express the slightest interest and encourages it, like Russian agents corrupting the office workers and FX's The Americans. She uses classic appeals like getting them to question authority, reframing what they're actually doing as trying to help, or just doing a small rebellious act, like touching the peak of Umate, the highest point on Coruscant. Elia says it's the only place on Coruscant where you can see the planet itself, which is her way of satisfying a need to what Pershing said earlier about being overwhelmed by the trillions of people on the planet. A trillion of anything is impossible for someone to fathom, but one 2-story rock as their Everest peak is tangible and literally grounding for him. Elia offers to buy him a Photon Fizzle, which is the green beverage in the vat in Dex's Diner in Coruscant in Attack of the Clones, which first originated in a 1985 episode of Star Wars Droids: The Last Prince. Pershing has to check with his parole officer droid.
How many people have actually watched that show, man? It was definitely a thing.
I like how you can see
an interesting
annoyance in Pershing when he has to sit through the repetitive question format. Do you have any anger or resentment? His cheek twitches just a little. So when Pershing asks Kane for help, notice the bushes they now sit beside are dying. A hint that this is actually a toxic, manipulative relationship. So this episode shows 2 loops of Pershing's workday routine. The first, he's compliant, not eager to ruffle feathers, but after being activated by Kane, he now pushes back against his boss to ask why they have to destroy tech just because it's Imperial. And his boss says, not only do we have the Imperial disposal yards to inventory, we're still decommissioning the Alliance fleet. They are scaling back the Rebel Alliance Navy that we saw in Return of the Jedi, something that we know at this point in history Leia Organa is speaking out against, and she later takes off with her independent fleet that becomes the Resistance. Like all of us oinky oinkies, Pershing snacks on a biscuit from his drawer, showing how he is now eating the forbidden fruit, poisoned apple from Elia. He's snacking on the bait, and he's hooked. So on the second loop, when his parole droid asks if he feels resentment, he tugs his ear. These interviews feel like the Voight Comp test from Blade Runner or Scientology auditing. Really, the questions are designed to provoke an emotional response that can be used against the interviewee. Pershing even kind of looks like Rick Deckard from Blade Runner with that raised trench coat collar. In the metro station, they pass a sign in Orabesh Federal Station, Executive Building Monument Park. The public transit system of Coruscant has zero tolerance policy on its rules and restrictions. Report all violations immediately. On the train, one guy raises his newspaper, reminding me of that moment in The Fugitive when that one L train rider in Chicago folds up the newspaper to see Richard Kimball's face on it. No, this is Star Wars, so I'm obligated to point out all Harrison Ford parallels. And in The Fugitive and Blade Runner, he played runners named Richard. And let's not forget these droids, nodding Indiana Jones, tickets please, Big and Last Crusade. Only when they're on the train does Kane reveal that they're gonna sneak into that Imperial disposal yard, and she says that's where she got the biscuits and gives them this flirty little nudge. In Spycraft, this is textbook honeypotty. They pass through the more industrial regions of Coruscant, where Darth Sidious was known to take residence during Attack of the Clones, where Dooku visited him. This is also where we saw Yaddle die in Tales of the Jedi. So if Kane is working on behalf of Palpatine's loyal forces, she might know her way around here from her youth on Coruscant. The fact that she knew the exact moment to jump and land on that cushy pad tells us that she has taken this route before. They gaze upon the Imperial Star Destroyer looming up from below in frame. Other times in Star Wars, the Star Destroyers always come from above. These rodents scurry about. One gnaws on a corner of a yellow biscuit, suggesting that Kane has literally walked this path before. Or Pershing is like Hansel and Gretel, following a trail of cookie crumbs to the place where the witch will throw them in an oven. So what is Kane planning here? She's obviously entrapping Pershing for the New Republic, but also it seems like she wants an exact inventory of what Pershing would need to continue any kind of genetics research, and then to erase him as a possible squealer for what Moff Gideon was really planning, and to remove any trail linked to Palpatine. When Pershing asks her what she wanted to be when she grew up, Kane steps back into the shadows, symbolizing her deceit. I think her loyalty to Palpatine and the Empire actually began at a young age. Outside, they spotlight him with a hovercraft marked in Orabesh Police. They waited to trap him until after leaving the Star Destroyer, so that way he couldn't hide back in the bellows of the ship. The Mon Calamari reintegration officer tells him the Mind Flayer won't be that bad, he'll just see some pleasant colors. So in addition to the memory erasing tech from Eternal Sunshine, this also resembles the tortuous brainwashing of 1984, or the treatment that was applied to Alex in A Clockwork Orange, whereas here they use visions. The Empire in Andor used sound torture. Remember the sounds of Dizonite children screaming? So the Empire was deaf to the billions of voices screaming out in terror, suddenly silence, whereas the New Republic is now blind to the blast of Starkiller Base that nuked Hosnian Prime. Pershing yells at the Mon Calamari, "It was a trap!" And that Mon Calamari just looks around confused. I just appreciate that this Akbar reference is completely lost on him. Now the music in the background of this room is the same music that plays in Jabba's palace when C-3PO arrives to deliver Luke's message in Return of the Jedi. I just love how in both cases they use these classic Star Wars themes in this new diegetic form in universe. Watching over this, Kane straightens her uniform once more, as we saw her do in her opening shot of this episode. Like Pershing's ear tug, this is her poker tell, and she munches on a yellow biscuit. Her saying she preferred the red ones was a lot. The Mind Flayer beams go from peaceful blue to evil red. She is frying his memories to erase any evidence of what Moff Gideon was doing in his cloning plot with the child, perhaps to cover the tracks of Snoke and Palpatine in the First Order. And we end the episode back with Mando and Bo-Katan, returning to the covert from the premiere episode. Paz Vizsla greets them. He's now played, and I think voiced too, by Tate Fletcher. In the past, he was only physicalized by Fletcher and voiced by Jon Favreau, but I think Tate Fletcher voices him now too. He asks who this Night Owl is. Bo-Katan, before becoming a Night Owl, actually fought alongside Paz's relative, Pre Vizsla, for a time on the Death Watch. The armorer tests the water by repeating the opening shot of this season, pouring into the tempening vat to create the same green shimmer.
Someone made a very good point, was that she's got a supply of this water. Is that a supply that she's gathered on her own? Does she know the Mandalore is safe and she's been going there herself to get it? Is that how she knows? Is that how she's got her own supply, or is it left over? Makes you wonder.
Showing that it was the living waters of Mandalore that the armorer uses every time she casts a new piece of Beskar. The armorer says that since they both bathed in the living waters, by creed they are both redeemed. And Bo-Katan truly has not removed her helmet since that moment. Paz Vizsla, though, notice does not congratulate them. It could be because he suspects an ulterior motive from Bo-Katan. She might be working an angle, because notice how this episode ends with her gaze settling on the Mythosar as the only real witness to the Mythosar. And since she never told Din Djarin about that, she may actually be intending to infiltrate this cult to win them over from the inside side, and to challenge Paz, challenge the Armorer, and most of all, challenge Din Djarin, who currently wields the
I mean,
Darksaber,
very
because
possible.
She wants the rightful rule of the scattered Mandalorian people. Because if you ever want to rule a group of people, you gotta start with the most extreme, die-hard true believers drinking that Kool-Aid. Hey, please subscribe to our new channel, The Deep Dive, and
That's a
support.
good point. That's a good point. I'm just hoping for the best. I'm hoping for the best from Bo, man. Oh man, learn from your mistakes and see where things go. Like, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. I loved this episode, man. I really do. It felt like a nice blend of Andor and Mando in the present day. They really just set the stage for how this stuff comes about and how these lingering vestiges of the Empire are still fighting in these little ways and striking back and making moves. The Pershing thing, I think, is more of a coincidence, but it all just lands all to be going on at the same time with the strike on Bo's castle, with what's happening in Pershing. There's something systematically going on in the background, and somebody's pulling the strings. I think we all know who it is. Some way, shape, or form. Whether it's not Gideon, it's going to be Thrawn. I think it all leads to Thrawn in one way, whether Gideon's a part of that machine or not. I think that's all where it's going. But also, and maybe I missed it, but did he not mention that the office that he was working at, that Pershing was working at, and decommissioning these things, while it may not be the exact same, like, department or whatever, that it was the exact type of setup as what Cyril was working in and Andor? I don't feel like he brought that up, because it was pretty much the same equipment, same login, same layout. Yeah, I loved the Andor vibes of this. And also, I mentioned this in my reaction, where the Amnesty people are housed, that looks like, and I don't know if it is exactly, but it looked like a similar, or maybe not the same, but a similar area as to the housing that Cyril himself lived in on Coruscant, or where his mother lived in the apartments there. It looked very much like maybe that had been repurposed, especially since then. Those Imperial housing elements, those barracks in a way, those apartments retrofitted to house the now, you know, like, these Amnesty members. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. I don't recall him mentioning any of that, so I just wanted to point that out and see what you guys think. But yeah, guys, I don't really have too much else for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to support New Rockstars. If you enjoyed this, though, like, subscribe, all that jazz. I'd really appreciate it. And remember to check out my reactions. And before we go, I want to shout out to channel legends: Benny Sherritt, Ryan Karen, Jason Coleman, Philly Vane, Yori, Corey Scott, Margaret Grace, Melita, Robert Anguiano, Raven McGann, Jeffrey Hale, M. Sephiroth, Jake Cantrell, Josh Lee, and Aaron Myers. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. But that's it for this video, guys. I'll see you all next week with the next one. And may the Force be with you always. Take care, everybody.